The massive Galactic Council chamber buzzed with worried voices and clicking sounds from dozens of different alien species. Ambassador Velthari from the peaceful Centauri world stood at the center podium, his blue skin pale with fear as he read the latest reports. His hands shook as he turned the digital pages showing destroyed cities and captured populations. 3 beautiful garden worlds had been completely destroyed by the hegemony forces in just 3 months. Billions of peaceful beings were now slaves or worse. The hegemony was a brutal military empire that crushed everything in its path, and they were getting stronger with each victory. "My fellow council members," Velthari said, his voice echoing in the huge chamber. "We face our darkest hour. Our combined fleets cannot stop them. Our defensive strategies have failed. We are running out of time and options." The assembled aliens murmured anxiously. Some had tentacles that writhed with worry, others had feathers that changed color with stress. All of them came from worlds where the weather was always perfect, where dangerous animals had been extinct for thousands of years, and where war was just something they read about in ancient history books. Council Prime Yaxelon, a tall being with crystal-like skin, stood up slowly. His species had been the peacekeepers of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. They had never faced anything like the hegemony before. "What do you suggest, Ambassador Velthari?" "We have already tried diplomatic solutions. We have offered them resources, technology, even entire uninhabited systems. They want only destruction." Velthari took a deep breath and activated a holographic display showing 2 planets that made everyone in the chamber step back in horror. The first world was covered in violent storms, earthquakes, and massive predatory creatures. The second was a blue and green world with extreme weather patterns and dangerous wildlife everywhere. "We must contact the Deathworlders," Velthari said quietly. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Half the council members fled the chamber. Others began making high-pitched stress sounds. Several delegates fainted on the spot. The word Deathworlder was the most frightening term in their language. These 2 worlds had been discovered only recently by long-range scouts. Both planets were classified as completely uninhabitable. The first world, called Kronos Prime, had acid rain, constant volcanic activity, and creatures that could tear through metal with their bare claws. The second world, called Earth, had massive storms that could level cities, temperature swings that would kill most galactic species instantly, and animals that hunted in coordinated packs. What made it even more terrifying was that both worlds somehow had advanced civilizations living on them. Beings that had not only survived these nightmare planets, but had actually thrived and built space-traveling technology. The scout reports described creatures so adapted to violence and survival that they might as well be living weapons. "Are you completely insane?" shouted Representative Clickstor from the peaceful Harmony worlds. "Those creatures would probably eat us the moment they arrived." "We don't even know if they can communicate properly," added another delegate. "For all we know, they solve every problem by fighting until something dies." Council Prime Yaxelon raised his hand for silence. The chamber slowly quieted down, though the fear was still thick in the air. The alternative is certain extinction at the hands of the hegemony. At least with the Deathworlders, we have an unknown factor. Sometimes the unknown is better than certain doom. The vote was close, but desperation won over terror. The Council authorized sending formal invitations to both Deathworlds, requesting military consultation and assistance against the hegemony threat. The messages were transmitted across vast distances of space using the fastest communication technology available. The Council expected to wait weeks or even months for a response, if these Deathworld creatures could even understand their peaceful intentions. Instead, both worlds responded within 2 days with shocking efficiency. The messages were brief, professional, and somehow more terrifying than silence would have been. Each world would send 2 military representatives to the Council station within 1 week. The speed of their response sent new waves of panic through the Council. These creatures were organized, had rapid decision-making processes, and possessed technology advanced enough for quick interstellar communication. Council medical teams began frantically preparing the station's hospital wings. They assumed the Deathworlders would arrive barely alive, poisoned by their own toxic atmospheres, injured from constant combat with their planet's deadly wildlife, and probably half-starved from the limited food sources on such hostile worlds. They prepared breathing apparatus for toxic atmospheres, medical equipment for treating unknown injuries, and even isolation chambers in case these creatures carried deadly diseases from their nightmare worlds. As the week passed, every member of the council found reasons to be elsewhere when the Deathworlders ships were scheduled to arrive. The few who remained did so only out of duty, and they stayed far away from the docking bays. The galaxy was about to meet humanity for the first time, and nobody knew that everything they feared about Deathworlders was about to be proven completely wrong in the most terrifying way possible. The docking bay doors hissed open, and Captain James Mitchell walked out like he was stepping into his own living room. There was something about the way he moved that made it clear he had never encountered a situation he couldn't handle. His uniform was neat but practical, and his eyes quickly scanned the room, taking in every detail without seeming worried about anything he saw. Right behind him came Commander Tyler Stone, walking with a relaxed confidence that only comes from years of military service. Both men looked completely healthy, alert, and surprisingly normal. This was not what the Council had expected at all. At the same exact moment, the second transport opened and two more figures emerged. Colonel Rebecca Hayes stepped out first, her environmental suit showing clear signs of advanced technology. The suit had patches and modifications that suggested it was built to handle extreme conditions that would kill most living things. Major David Brooks followed, carrying equipment that the council members couldn't identify but looked very sophisticated. "Well, this is interesting," Hayes said, walking directly over to Mitchell with a friendly smile. "Always nice to meet fellow Deathworlders. We've heard some fascinating things about Earth's wildlife situation." Mitchell grinned back and shook her hand firmly. "Your planet's reputation for acid storms is pretty impressive too, though I have to say, our hurricanes might give you a decent challenge by galactic standards." The council members who had forced themselves to stay and witness this first contact meeting were now backing away slowly. They watched in complete horror as these four creatures from nightmare worlds chatted like old friends meeting at a peaceful gathering. "Oh, the acid storms are manageable once you know the patterns," Brooks said casually. "The real trick is dealing with the predators that hunt during the calm periods. Some of them have developed resistance to the acid, which makes things interesting." Stone nodded with genuine interest. "We have similar issues with our apex predators. Great white sharks, saltwater crocodiles, polar bears. Each one requires different survival strategies." At the mention of creatures called polar bears, Representative Clickstore made a choking sound and had to sit down. The very idea that these Deathworlders lived alongside multiple types of apex predators was beyond comprehension. Hayes laughed. "At least your predators are biological. We have some geological hazards that actively hunt. Lava flows that seem to track movement. Sinkholes that open strategically. The planet itself tries to kill you. Earthquakes," Mitchell added helpfully. "Tsunamis, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions. Last year I was caught in a blizzard that dropped temperatures to -40 degrees. Good times. Survived a landslide once," Brooks mentioned like he was talking about a minor inconvenience. "Took 3 days to dig out, but the emergency shelter held up well." This casual mention of surviving what sounded like certain death was too much for 3 council representatives. They simply fainted where they stood, their alien forms crumpling to the floor. The remaining council members stared at these 4 humans who were discussing natural disasters and deadly animals like other species might discuss the weather. The humans noticed the distress they were causing and quickly shifted their attention to the reason they had been invited. Stone gestured toward the terrified alien diplomats. "Right then. We should probably discuss why you called us here. We understand you're having some trouble with a hostile force." Ambassador Velthari, whose blue skin had gone almost white with fear, shakily activated a holographic display. His hands trembled as he brought up detailed tactical reports of hegemony victories. These were the battle records that had kept the council awake with nightmares for months. "These are the enemy forces we face," Velthari said quietly. "As you can see, they are incredibly powerful and completely ruthless. They have destroyed everything in their path." The 4 humans gathered around the holographic display, studying the tactical information with professional interest. The council members expected them to be impressed, maybe even intimidated by the obvious military might of the hegemony forces. Instead, Mitchell frowned and looked genuinely confused. This is their idea of strategy. Hayes was already analyzing the fleet formations shown in the hologram. "These battle plans are terrible. Look at this positioning. They are leaving massive gaps in their defensive lines." Brooks pointed to another section of the display. and they are wasting enormous amounts of firepower on non-strategic targets. This isn't military efficiency. This is just random destruction. Stone shook his head in what looked like professional disappointment. No wonder they are winning. Their opponents aren't fighting back properly. These formations would collapse instantly against any competent resistance. The council members realized with growing terror that these Deathworlders weren't impressed by the hegemony's might. They were critiquing it like teachers correcting a student's homework. The most dangerous military force in known galactic history was being dismissed as amateur-level incompetence. The humans had been on the station for less than 10 minutes, and they had already made it clear that the galaxy's greatest fear was just a minor tactical problem in their opinion. The Council's main war room had been designed to inspire confidence and calm decision-making. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, and peaceful colors were supposed to help representatives think clearly during difficult times. But now the room felt completely different. The 4 humans had transformed the space into something that looked like a military command center. Hayes stood at the central holographic display, her fingers moving quickly through battle reports that had taken the Council's best analysts weeks to compile. She absorbed information at a speed that seemed impossible, occasionally pausing to highlight specific tactical movements or fleet positions. The other humans gathered around her, each one focusing on different aspects of the data. After what felt like hours but had only been 30 minutes, Hayes stepped back from the display and looked at her fellow humans. They exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes without a single word being spoken. It was a kind of silent conversation that only came from years of working together in dangerous situations. "All right," Hayes said, turning to face the assembled council members. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. This hegemony force that has your entire galactic coalition absolutely terrified is the same group shown in these tactical reports." Brooks shook his head in what looked like genuine disbelief. "You're seriously telling us that these are the military formations that conquered 12 star systems?" Council Prime Yaxeloen's crystal-like skin flickered with defensive colors. "They have completely destroyed every fleet sent against them. Their weapons technology is beyond anything we've ever encountered." "No," Stone said firmly, manipulating the holographic display to show the hegemony's attack patterns. "Look at this data objectively. They are winning because they've never faced opponents who actually fight back properly. Every single one of these victories was against forces that use purely defensive strategies." Mitchell stepped forward and began highlighting specific sections of the battle records. "Watch how they approach each engagement. Same pattern every time. They rely entirely on overwhelming initial force and psychological intimidation. But look what happens when their first attack doesn't achieve immediate victory." The hologram showed several battles where the hegemony had faced unexpected resistance. In every case, their formations became disorganized and their tactics became increasingly desperate and wasteful. "Their command structure falls apart the moment they encounter real opposition," Hayes observed. "These aren't the tactics of a professional military force. This is the behavior of bullies who have never been challenged." Stone pulled up the most recent hegemony victory, a battle that had terrified the Council because of its apparent tactical brilliance. "Look at this engagement. They are directing 70% of their total firepower at civilian infrastructure and non-military targets." That's absolutely terrible," Ambassador Velthari whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "It's inefficient," Hay corrected him in a matter-of-fact tone that somehow made her words even more disturbing. "If your goal is to win a war, you target military assets, supply lines, and command structures. You end the conflict as quickly as possible to minimize casualties on both sides." Brooks nodded in agreement. This prolonged terror campaign approach actually works against them strategically. Every day they spend destroying civilian targets is another day their enemies have to study their tactics, regroup their forces, and develop countermeasures. The council members found themselves staring at the 4 humans with a mixture of fascination and growing horror. These Deathworlders weren't just analyzing warfare like it was a technical problem to be solved. They were critiquing the hegemony's methods like art critics reviewing a poorly executed painting. "The real issue," Mitchell continued, "is that they've gotten lazy. 12 easy victories against unprepared opponents have made them overconfident. They are not adapting their strategies because they haven't needed to." Stone began bringing up displays of the Council's own defensive capabilities. "We're going to need complete tactical data on your coalition's resources. Fleet compositions, industrial capacity, supply line logistics, defensive installations, everything you have. Yaxlon leaned forward hopefully. Are you saying you have a plan to stop them? The four humans exchanged another one of those silent conversations. Then they all smiled at exactly the same time. It was not a reassuring expression. The smiles had the same quality as a predator, deciding that its prey looked particularly appetizing. Oh, we definitely have a plan, Hayes said with quiet confidence. Mitchell's grin widened. Several plans. Actually, the hard part is going to be choosing which approach will be most effective and least destructive to your existing infrastructure, Brooks added helpfully. Stone was already pulling up star charts and calculating travel times between systems. We'll need about 48 hours to coordinate with our respective home fleets. Maybe 7 to 2 if we want to do this with minimal casualties. The council members realized with dawning terror that these humans weren't just confident they could defeat the hegemony. They were already discussing multiple strategic options and worrying about collateral damage to council infrastructure. The most dangerous military threat in galactic history had just become a logistical planning exercise. Ambassador Velthari found his voice first. What exactly are you planning to do? The human smiles became even more unsettling. We're going to teach the hegemony what real warfare looks like, Hayes said simply. Nobody in the council chamber felt reassured by this promise. The council's emergency session chamber had never witnessed anything like what was happening now. For 3 straight hours, the four humans had been calmly outlining their proposed solution to the hegemony problem. What they presented wasn't just a military strategy. It was a complete reimagining of how galactic warfare could be conducted. Ambassador Velthari stood up abruptly, his blue skin flushed with what looked like panic. Absolutely not, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. The Galactic Council cannot and will not sanction such complete barbarism. Mitchell looked genuinely surprised by this reaction. He rubbed his forehead and let out a tired sigh. Ambassador, with all due respect, this isn't barbarism. This is military efficiency designed to save lives on both sides. The plan the humans had presented was both elegantly simple and utterly terrifying in its implications. The combined Earth and Chronos fleets would simultaneously strike 3 critical hegemony positions. These weren't random attacks, but surgically precise operations targeting supply depots, communication hubs, and fleet maintenance facilities. The goal was to cripple the hegemony's ability to wage war without actually destroying their main battle fleets. What you're describing are preemptive strikes against an enemy that hasn't directly threatened you, Council Prime Yaxlon said weakly. That's exactly the kind of aggressive behavior that started this whole conflict. Hayes stepped forward, her expression serious but patient. We're talking about ending a war before it gets exponentially worse. Look at the casualty projections if this conflict continues at its current pace. Every single day you spend in committee meetings and diplomatic discussions, more innocent civilians die. The holographic display showed mathematical projections that made several council members physically ill. If the current pattern continued, the hegemony would control half the galaxy within 2 years. The civilian casualties would number in the trillions. Stone activated a new tactical projection that filled the room with 3-dimensional star maps and fleet movement patterns. Look, this is actually pretty straightforward. Your people excel at logistics, coordination, and resource management. Our people have extensive experience with applied military force. We combine our respective strengths. Applied military force, repeated Representative Clickstor in a horrified whisper. We hit them hard and fast at exactly the right locations, Brooks continued, manipulating the display to show precise strike coordinates. Disable their operational capacity, then immediately offer reasonable surrender terms while they are still processing what happened. The casual way he said, hit them hard and fast, made half the council members step backward. These humans discuss military violence the same way other species might talk about scheduling maintenance on their transportation systems. Surrender terms. Yaxlon asked, sounding confused. You're planning to offer them surrender terms. Of course, Brooks replied, looking genuinely surprised at this needed explanation. The goal isn't the complete extermination of their species. The goal is establishing lasting peace. You demonstrate overwhelming force capability, make it clear that continued resistance is futile, then you offer them meaningful incentives to join your coalition instead of fighting against it. Hayes brought up a new section of their plan that detailed post-conflict integration strategies. Most hegemony forces are probably just following orders from leadership that sees conquest as their only option for survival. You change their circumstances, give them better alternatives, and suddenly they become potential allies instead of enemies. Mitchell nodded in agreement. Our historical analysis suggests that most aggressive expansion campaigns happen because a civilization feels threatened or resource-constrained. Address those underlying issues, and the aggression usually stops. The council members found themselves staring at these four humans in a completely new kind of terror. These Deathworlders weren't just planning military action. They were outlining a comprehensive strategy for reshaping galactic politics through a precise application of overwhelming force followed by diplomatic integration. Stone pulled up timeline projections that showed the entire operation from start to finish. The actual military phase should take about 6 days. Then we spend maybe 3 weeks on negotiation and treaty establishment. After that, it's mostly just helping them transition their economy from conquest-based to trade-based. 6 days, Velthari repeated in a stunned whisper. Could be shorter if they surrender quickly, Hayes added helpfully. We're building in extra time for contingencies. The casual competence with which these humans planned to completely restructure galactic civilization was more unsettling than any direct threat the Council had ever faced. They weren't angry warriors seeking revenge. They were professional problem solvers who happened to specialize in ending conflicts through superior planning and execution. Brooks was already pulling up supply chain logistics for the post-war reconstruction phase. You'll want to start preparing humanitarian aid packages. Food, medical supplies, infrastructure repair equipment. The faster we can get their civilian population stabilized, the smoother the transition will be. The room fell completely silent as the full scope of the human plan became clear. This wasn't just military strategy. It was a complete roadmap for ending the war, integrating the hegemony into galactic civilization, and establishing a lasting peace that would benefit everyone involved. Finally, Council Prime Yaxelon found his voice. When would we begin this operation? Mitchell checked something on his personal communication device. Tomorrow morning, Galactic Standard Time. Our fleets are already in position and waiting for authorization. The Council realized that while they had been debating, the humans had been preparing. The most complex military operation in galactic history was ready to launch at a moment's notice. The war that was supposed to last for decades ended in exactly 6 days, 12 hours, and 37 minutes. When the final Hegemony Command ship transmitted its unconditional surrender, half the galaxy was still trying to understand what had actually happened. The joint human operation had been executed with surgical precision that defied all previous understanding of large-scale military coordination. 3 separate strike forces had hit their targets simultaneously across multiple star systems, moving with perfect timing and devastating effectiveness. But what shocked everyone most was that the majority of hegemony personnel had survived the encounters. This wasn't the total annihilation that most galactic conflicts produced. This was something entirely different. The humans had somehow managed to completely disable the hegemony's ability to wage war while keeping most of their ships intact and their crews alive. The peace negotiations took place on a neutral council station, with representatives from all involved parties sitting around a massive circular table. Former Hegemony Admiral Krelvon sat across from the 4 humans, his reptilian features showing a mixture of respect and complete bewilderment. I have to ask, Krelvon said, his translator converting his hissing speech into standard galactic. How did you accomplish what you did? Our battle computers are still analyzing the engagement data, and none of it makes sense according to established military doctrine. Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair and studied the former enemy admiral with something that looked almost like sympathy. You fight like a species that has never been truly challenged, she explained patiently. Every battle in your history was against opponents who were either weaker than you or who used the same basic tactical approaches you did. Mitchell nodded in agreement. Your formations, your strategies, your entire military philosophy is built around the assumption that overwhelming force will always win. But you've never had to adapt to opponents who think differently than you do. We fight like our survival depends on every single tactical decision, Brooks added. Because on our worlds, It usually does. When your planet is constantly trying to kill you, you learn to think 3 steps ahead and have backup plans for your backup plans. Stone activated a small holographic display showing simplified versions of the recent battles. Look at how you deployed your fleets. Textbook intimidation tactics designed to break enemy morale before the actual fighting starts. Very effective against opponents who scare easily, but completely useless against opponents who have spent their entire evolutionary history being scared and fighting anyway, Hayes continued. Fear is just another piece of tactical information to us. It doesn't change how we analyze a situation or make strategic decisions. The treaty signing ceremony that followed was one of the most awkward diplomatic events in galactic history. The Council had achieved everything they had hoped for. The hegemony was not only defeated but was actively requesting membership in the Galactic Coalition. Trade agreements were being established. Former enemy territories were transitioning to peaceful governance. But now the Council members sat in uncomfortable silence as they watched Captain Mitchell and Major Brooks casually discuss defensive strategy improvements over cups of coffee. The 2 humans were laughing about something involving explosive decompression and hull breach protocols, topics that made most Council species physically ill just thinking about them. The Mutual Defense Pact between Earth and Kronos Prime has been formally established. Stone announced to the assembled diplomats. We're happy to extend similar security arrangements to any Council worlds that might be interested in upgrading their defensive capabilities. The offer was met with what could only be described as grateful terror. Everyone wanted the protection that these humans could provide, but nobody was entirely comfortable with what that protection might actually look like in practice. Within hours of the announcement, 3 different star systems had submitted formal requests for human military advisors. 2 more systems requested technological exchanges focused on defensive systems. A dozen Council worlds wanted to establish trade agreements that would give them access to human manufacturing techniques. Ambassador Velthari found himself watching the 4 humans as they discussed some technical aspect of military engineering. They were laughing at what sounded like a joke about survival techniques in vacuum environments, and he realized that the fundamental balance of galactic civilization had shifted permanently. The most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered considered the Council to be their friends and allies. These Deathworlders who could casually discuss topics that gave other species nightmares were genuinely committed to protecting the peaceful civilizations they had just saved. Is this what safety feels like? Representative Clickstall asked quietly, watching Hayes demonstrate something involving emergency escape procedures to a group of fascinated Council engineers. Velthari considered the question carefully. The humans had proven they could end galactic conflicts with almost casual efficiency. They had turned the galaxy's greatest military threat into a cooperative ally in less than a week. They were already working on defensive improvements that would make future conflicts much less likely. I think so, he finally replied, though I suspect none of us will sleep quite as peacefully as we used to. And somehow, that seemed like a perfectly acceptable price to pay for living in a galaxy where humans considered you worth protecting. The age of peaceful galactic civilization had ended, but something much more secure had taken its place. The galaxy now had guardians who understood that the best way to preserve peace was to be very, very good at ending wars quickly and decisively.